The prenatal DNA test bill arrived on a Tuesday morning, addressed to my wife, Naomi. I stared at it over my coffee, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. I hadn't authorized any test. My name is Quentin Blair, and I'm a civil engineer. I build things that last, things that can withstand pressure. I thought my marriage was one of them. Standing in our loft apartment, surrounded by blueprints and the exposed brick walls I'd carefully restored, I realized I'd been wrong about a lot of things. The envelope sat on our kitchen counter like a small bomb. Naomi was still asleep upstairs, and I could hear the rain hammering against our windows. The storm had been building all night, and now it felt like it was inside our home too. I'd been noticing changes in Naomi for months. She'd become aggressive, constantly criticizing what she called my lack of masculinity. She'd started spending nights at her sister's house, though I'd begun to suspect there was no sister involved. The woman I'd married 3 years ago, the freelance graphic designer who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and trace the blueprints on my drafting table with her finger, had become someone I barely recognized. "You're not man enough," she'd said just last week, her voice dripping with contempt. "A real man would demand respect instead of just taking whatever scraps he's given." I'd thought she was just stressed about work. Her freelance business had been struggling, and I'd been covering most of our expenses. But now, staring at this medical bill, I understood there was something much bigger happening. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I set the envelope aside. I needed to get to work, needed to focus on something that made sense. The construction site downtown was behind schedule, and my foreman Rick was expecting me early. Rick was an old boxer who'd transitioned into construction management, and he had a way of cutting through nonsense that I envied. But first, I had to know what was in that envelope. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. The bill was for a prenatal paternity test, dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, when Naomi had told me she was pregnant with our first child. 3 weeks ago, when I'd been planning to convert our spare room into a nursery. The test results weren't included, just the billing statement. But the fact that she'd ordered it at all told me everything I needed to know. You don't get a paternity test when you're certain who the father is. I heard footsteps upstairs. Naomi was awake. "Quentin?" she called down. "Did the mail come yet?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just some bills." She appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing one of my old engineering t-shirts. Even pregnant, she was beautiful. Dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders, green eyes that used to look at me with love. Now they seemed calculating. "Anything important?" she asked, coming down slowly. "Nothing we can't handle," I lied, sliding the envelope into my jacket pocket. She nodded and moved to the coffee maker. "I'm staying at Sarah's again tonight. Girl stuff, you know." Sarah. The mysterious sister who'd never been mentioned in the 3 years we'd been together until recently. The sister whose last name Naomi could never quite remember, whose phone number wasn't saved in Naomi's contacts under any variation of Sarah. "Of course," I said. "I'll probably work late anyway. The Morrison project is giving me trouble." It wasn't true. The Morrison project was ahead of schedule, but I needed time to think, to figure out what I was dealing with. Naomi kissed my cheek absently, and I caught a whiff of cologne that wasn't mine. Something expensive and cloying, nothing like the simple soap I used. "See you tomorrow," she said, already reaching for her overnight bag, the bag that seemed to stay permanently packed these days. After she left, I sat in the silence of our apartment and tried to process what I'd learned. My wife was pregnant with someone else's child, and she was planning to let me believe it was mine. The weight of that realization settled over me like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. I thought about the nursery plans I'd been sketching, the crib I'd already ordered online, the way my heart had jumped when she'd told me we were going to be parents, all of it built on a lie. My phone buzzed. A text from Naomi. "Love you. See you tomorrow night." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. The rain kept falling, and I sat surrounded by blueprints for other people's dreams, wondering how I'd missed the signs that my own life was collapsing. I couldn't concentrate at work. Rick noticed immediately. "You look like someone ran over your dog," he said, joining me at the site trailer where I was pretending to review structural plans. "What's eating you?" Rick Martinez was 53 years old and built like the heavyweight boxer he'd been in his 20s. He'd transitioned into construction after a career-ending injury, and he had the kind of straightforward wisdom that comes from taking punches and learning to hit back. "Marriage troubles," I said, not looking up from the blueprints. "The pretty one giving you grief again?" I'd mentioned Naomi's recent attitude changes to Rick a few weeks ago, though I'd kept the details vague. Now I wondered if I should have been paying closer attention to his advice. "Something like that." Rick pulled up a chair. "You want to talk about it, or you want to keep pretending those foundation specs are going to solve your personal problems?" I set down my pencil and looked at him. Rick had been married to the same woman for 28 years. If anyone would understand relationship dynamics, it would be him. "If you suspected your wife was cheating, how would you handle it?" Rick's expression grew serious. "Depends. You talking about suspicion, or you talking about knowing for sure?" "Somewhere in between." "Well," Rick said, leaning back in his chair, "I'd say you need to be certain before you do anything you can't take back. But I'd also say that if your gut is telling you something's wrong, it probably is. Women don't usually change their whole personality for no reason." I thought about the DNA test bill in my jacket pocket. What if you found proof? Then you'd have a decision to make. You could confront her, try to work it out, or you could start protecting yourself. "Protecting myself how?" Rick studied my face carefully. "Legally, financially, emotionally. Depends on what kind of proof we're talking about." I pulled out the envelope and handed it to him. Rick read the bill twice, his expression growing darker. "Snake," he said quietly. "She's pregnant?" 3 months. And she ordered a paternity test without telling you. That's about the size of it." Rick handed the bill back to me. "You find the actual results yet?" "Not yet, but I'm going to." "Be smart about it," Rick warned. "Don't go tearing through her stuff like a crazy person. If this is what it looks like, you're going to need to think strategically." That evening, I sat in our apartment waiting for Naomi to leave for another night at Sarah's. She spent an hour getting ready, putting on makeup and perfume like she was going on a date. When she finally left, kissing me goodbye with lips that tasted like lies, I waited another 30 minutes to make sure she wasn't coming back. Then I searched our bedroom. I felt like a criminal going through her things, but the DNA test bill had changed everything. In her nightstand drawer, beneath old magazines and a tangle of charging cables, I found a manila envelope. Inside were the test results. The baby wasn't mine. The biological father was listed as Liam Foster. I sat on our bed, staring at the name. Liam Foster. I knew that name. Naomi had mentioned him before, her high school boyfriend, the one who'd broken her heart before she'd met me, the one she'd claimed to have no contact with. The test was dated 3 weeks ago, the same day Naomi had told me about the pregnancy. She'd known from the beginning that the child wasn't mine, and she'd let me believe otherwise. She'd let me start planning a future that was built on deception. My phone rang. It was Naomi. "Hey, baby," she said, her voice bright and false. "Just wanted to say goodnight." "Good night," I managed. "You okay? You sound weird." "Just tired. Long day." "Well, get some rest. I love you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Love you too," I said automatically, then hung up. I sat there holding the test results, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. The grief was overwhelming, not just for the marriage I thought I had, but for the child I'd already begun to love. But underneath the grief was something else. A cold, calculating anger. Naomi thought she was smart. She thought she could manipulate me into raising another man's child while she continued her affair. She'd probably been planning this for months, maybe longer. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. I spent the rest of the night thinking, planning. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I had research to do. Liam Foster wasn't hard to find. A quick search on social media revealed he was 33, worked at a car dealership across town, and was apparently single according to his relationship status. His profile was full of pictures of expensive cars he probably couldn't afford and nights out at clubs that looked expensive. He was everything I wasn't, flashy, superficial, the kind of guy who wore too much cologne and thought charm could substitute for character. Looking at his photos, I could see why Naomi had been attracted to him. He represented everything she seemed to want lately: excitement, status, the appearance of success. What he didn't represent was stability or responsibility. Based on his social media posts, he lived paycheck to paycheck and spent his money on appearances rather than substance. Not exactly father material. I screenshot several of his posts and saved them to a folder on my laptop. Then I started working on my own plan. The apartment was mine. I'd bought it 2 years before meeting Naomi, and her name wasn't on the deed or the mortgage. Legally, I could ask her to leave anytime I wanted. Our joint bank account was small. Most of our money was in my individual accounts that I'd maintained since before our marriage. Naomi's freelance income was irregular, and she'd been increasingly dependent on my steady engineering salary. The car she drove was registered in my name. The credit cards she used were mine, with her as an authorized user. Even her health insurance was through my employer. Without me, Naomi would have very little, which explained why she was trying to pass off another man's child as mine. She needed a provider, and I'd been stupid enough to volunteer for the job, but not anymore. I spent the morning documenting everything. I photographed the DNA test results from multiple angles. I printed copies and stored them in different locations. I reviewed our lease agreements, insurance policies, and financial records. Then I started packing. I didn't touch anything that was clearly hers, but I removed all of my personal items from the common areas: my books, my tools, my engineering equipment, everything that made the apartment feel like our shared home. I wanted it to be clear that this was my space, and she was no longer welcome in it. While I worked, I thought about what Rick had said about protecting myself. He was right. This needed to be handled strategically. I couldn't just throw Naomi out and hope for the best. I needed to make sure she understood that her manipulative games were over. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Naomi. "Having lunch with Mom today. Might stop by this afternoon to grab some things." Perfect. That gave me time to prepare. I drafted a formal eviction notice, using the legal language I'd learned from helping friends with tenant disputes. 30 days notice, as required by state law, with clear language about why the tenancy was being terminated. I printed it on official letterhead and had it notarized at the bank. Then I drove to Naomi's parents' house. Howard and Judith Hurst lived in one of the older, more prestigious neighborhoods in town. Their house was a massive Victorian that they'd restored to museum-quality perfection, and they were exactly the kind of people who cared deeply about appearances and reputation. They were also deeply religious and conservative, the kind of people who believed strongly in traditional family values and moral behavior. Naomi had always been careful to present herself as the perfect daughter when she was around them. I wondered how they'd react when they learned the truth about their perfect daughter's pregnancy. Howard answered the door, looking surprised to see me. "Quentin, what brings you by? Is Naomi with you?" "Actually, I need to speak with you and Judith about Naomi. Is she here?" "No, she said she was having lunch with friends. Come in, come in." The Hurst living room was like a magazine spread, everything perfectly coordinated and spotlessly clean. Judith appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Quentin, dear, How nice to see you. How are you feeling about becoming a father? The question hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my expression neutral. That's actually what I need to talk to you about. I sat down across from them and pulled out the DNA test results. I found these in Naomi's things yesterday. Howard took the papers and read them, his face growing pale. Judith looked over his shoulder, and I watched her expression change from confusion to horror. I don't understand, Judith said weakly. This says the baby isn't yours. That's right. The biological father is Liam Foster, someone Naomi has apparently been seeing behind my back. Howard's face was turning red. This has to be a mistake. Naomi would never… She ordered the test herself 3 weeks ago, I interrupted, showing them the bill. The same day she told me about the pregnancy. She's known all along that the child isn't mine. Judith sank into her chair, her face crumpling. Oh, dear God. Oh, Naomi, what have you done? I'm filing for divorce, I continued, and I wanted you to hear it from me first, before she tries to spin this as somehow being my fault. Howard stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. I can't believe this, after everything we taught her about honesty and commitment. She's been staying at someone's house several nights a week, I added. She told me it was her sister Sarah, but I don't think Sarah exists. She doesn't, Judith whispered. Naomi doesn't have a sister named Sarah. The three of us sat in silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of Naomi's deception. What do you need from us? Howard finally asked. Nothing. I just thought you should know the truth before she comes to you for help. Judith was crying quietly now. We raised her better than this. We taught her about honesty and responsibility. I know you did, I said gently. This isn't your fault. I left them sitting in their perfect living room, surrounded by the wreckage of their daughter's lies. As I drove home, I felt a grim satisfaction. Naomi's safety net was about to disappear, and she didn't even know it yet. Naomi came home around 4 o'clock, humming to herself as she walked through the front door. She seemed to be in a particularly good mood, which made what was about to happen even more satisfying. Hey, babe, she called out, dropping her purse by the door. How was your day off? Productive, I said from the kitchen table, where I'd arranged the eviction notice, copies of the DNA test, and her packed belongings. She walked into the kitchen and stopped when she saw the setup. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, fear, and then something that looked like calculation. What's all this? She asked, though her voice had lost its casual tone. I think you know what it is. She picked up the DNA test results with shaking hands, scanning the document. Where did you get this? Your nightstand, right where you left it. Naomi set the papers down and looked at me directly for the first time in months. Quentin, I can explain. I'm sure you can. You're very creative. It's not what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like you've been cheating on me with Liam Foster, got pregnant with his child, and decided to trick me into raising it. Her face flushed red. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. Naomi sat down across from me, and I could see her mind working, trying to find an angle that would get her out of this. Liam and we ran into each other a few months ago. It was just one time, Quentin. One mistake. One time that resulted in pregnancy. It was an accident. I never meant for this to happen. But when it did happen, you decided to lie to me about it. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. You weren't scared, Naomi. You were calculating. You saw an opportunity to have your cake and eat it too, keep your affair partner, and stick me with the responsibility. That's not true, isn't it? You've been staying at Sarah's house several nights a week, except Sarah doesn't exist, does she? Naomi's mouth opened and closed without sound. You've been staying with Liam, I continued, playing house with him while coming home to me for financial security. Quentin, please. And when you found out you were pregnant, you figured you could just continue the charade. Let me think I was going to be a father. Let me start planning for a family, while you carried on your double life. Tears started running down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration that her plan had been discovered. I love you, she said desperately. I made a mistake, but I love you. No, you don't. You love what I provide. Stability, financial security, a nice apartment, and someone to pay your bills while you play around with your high school boyfriend. That's not fair. I picked up the eviction notice and handed it to her. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. She read the document, her face growing pale. You can't just throw me out. Actually, I can. This is my apartment. Your name isn't on anything. I'm pregnant. Yes, with Liam Foster's child. I suggest you work that out with him. Naomi stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. A real man would stay. A strong man would work through this. There it was, the manipulation tactic she'd been using for months, trying to shame me into accepting unacceptable behavior. A strong man wouldn't let himself be used as a meal ticket while his wife cheats on him, I replied calmly. A strong man would have standards. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. Something you should try sometime. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back. You'll regret this, Quentin. You'll realize what you're throwing away. The only thing I'm throwing away is a lying, cheating wife who thinks I'm stupid enough to raise another man's child. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. I sat in the sudden silence, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd planned, but that didn't make it any easier. My phone rang 20 minutes later. It was Naomi. Quentin, please, can we talk about this like adults? We just did. I mean, really talk. I'll come clean about everything. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out. You made your choices. What about the baby? What about it? It's not my baby. But you could... we could... Could what? Pretend it's mine? Live a lie for the rest of our lives? People do it all the time. I'm not people, I'm me, and I don't accept that kind of arrangement. There was a long pause. I called Liam, she said finally. And? He says he's not ready to be a father. That's between you and him. Quentin, please, I don't have anywhere else to go. You have 30 days to figure it out. My parents already know about the DNA test. I showed them this afternoon. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You told them? She whispered. I told them the truth. Something you seem to have trouble with. She hung up without another word. I made myself dinner and ate it in peace, surrounded by the blueprints and engineering books that made sense in a way that relationships apparently didn't. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The next few days were strangely peaceful. Naomi didn't come home, didn't call, didn't text. I assumed she was staying with Liam, trying to figure out her next move. I went back to work and threw myself into the Morrison project, finding comfort in the straightforward logic of structural engineering. Rick noticed the change in my mood immediately. You look better, he said during our morning coffee break. Things work out at home? You could say that. I took your advice about protecting myself. Good man. What happened? I told him about finding the DNA test results and confronting Naomi. Rick listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. So she's gone? For now. She has 30 days to find somewhere else to live. And the boyfriend? Apparently not interested in playing daddy. Rick chuckled grimly. Funny how that works. These guys are all about the fun and games until there are consequences. She seemed genuinely surprised that I wouldn't just go along with it. Some people think they can manipulate their way through life without ever facing reality, Rick said. Sounds like your wife is one of them. On Thursday evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Naomi's best friend Shannon Lee standing in the hallway, looking furious. Shannon was 29 years old and worked as a marketing coordinator for a local advertising agency. She'd never liked me, and the feeling was mutual. She was the kind of person who thrived on drama and gossip, always stirring up trouble in other people's relationships. "You bastard," she said without preamble. "Hello, Shannon. Nice to see you, too." How could you do this to her? She's pregnant and scared, and you just threw her out like garbage. I threw out a cheating wife who tried to trick me into raising another man's child. She made one mistake. One mistake that lasted months and resulted in pregnancy. That's not a mistake, Shannon. That's a choice. Shannon pushed past me into the apartment. She loves you. No, she loves my bank account and the security I provide. There's a difference. You're being incredibly selfish. I almost laughed. I'm being selfish? I'm not the one who cheated and lied for months. She's sorry. She wants to work things out. Then she should have thought about that before she started sleeping with Liam Foster. Shannon's face changed slightly. How do you know about Liam? DNA test. He's the father of her baby. That doesn't mean anything. Biology isn't everything. It is when your wife lies to you about it. Shannon sat down on my couch without being invited. Look, Quentin, I know this is hard to accept, but Naomi needs you right now. She's pregnant and alone, and Liam isn't going to step up. That's not my problem. It could be your child. Those tests aren't always accurate. I stared at her. Are you seriously suggesting I ignore scientific evidence because it's inconvenient? I'm suggesting you fight for your marriage. My marriage ended the moment Naomi decided to cheat on me. Shannon stood up, her face flushed with anger. You're going to regret this. When you're sitting alone in this apartment in 10 years, you're going to remember that you had a chance to be a father and threw it away because of your pride. My pride? This isn't about pride, Shannon. This is about honesty and respect and basic human decency. She made a mistake. Stop calling it a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. This was a deliberate choice to betray our marriage and lie to me about the consequences. Shannon headed for the door, then turned back. The Naomi I know isn't the person you're describing. Then you don't know Naomi as well as you think you do. After she left, I called Rick. The friend brigade is starting, I told him. Naomi sent Shannon over to try to guilt me into taking her back. That was fast. She must be getting desperate. Shannon seemed to think I should ignore the DNA test and raise the kid anyway. Some people have interesting ideas about relationships, Rick said dryly. You holding firm? Absolutely. But I have a feeling this is just the beginning. I was right. Over the weekend, I received calls from 2 of Naomi's cousins and her aunt, all trying to convince me to work things out and think about the baby. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They'd start by acknowledging that Naomi had made mistakes, then gradually shift to suggesting that I was being unreasonable for not forgiving her. None of them seemed to understand that this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about reality. Naomi had shown me who she really was, and I believed her. On Sunday afternoon, Naomi herself showed up at my door. She looked terrible, pale, tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Can I come in? She asked quietly. You have 5 minutes. She sat down at the kitchen table where we'd had our confrontation a few days earlier. I've been staying at a hotel. What happened to Liam? He says he needs time to think. About what? About whether he wants to be involved with the baby. I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but I pushed it down. That's between you and him. Quentin, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we can get past this. No, we can't. Why not? People work through infidelity all the time. Because this wasn't just infidelity. This was a calculated plan to deceive me about the most fundamental aspect of marriage, starting a family. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. So you decided not to tell me at all. You were going to let me believe I was the father and raise Liam's child. Would that have been so terrible? You want to be a father? I want to be a father to my own child, with a wife who respects me enough to be honest. I can be honest now. It's too late for that. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Please, I'll do anything. I'll cut off all contact with Liam. I'll go to counseling. I'll sign a prenup for any future assets. I pulled my hand away. You still don't get it, do you? Get what? This isn't a negotiation. You can't bargain your way out of the consequences of your choices. So that's it? 3 years of marriage means nothing? 3 years of marriage meant everything to me. That's why this hurts so much. She stood up, her face hardening. Fine. But don't expect me to make this easy for you. I wouldn't dream of it. After she left, I sat in my kitchen and thought about what she'd said. She was right about one thing. I did want to be a father, but not like this. Not built on lies and manipulation. I deserved better than that. And someday, I'd find it. 2 weeks into Naomi's 30-day notice period, I got a call from my lawyer. Quentin, we have a problem, said David Chen, the attorney who'd helped me with the apartment purchase years earlier. Your wife filed a motion claiming you're the legal father of her unborn child. I sat down heavily in my desk chair. Based on what? Marriage. In this state, children born during a marriage are presumed to be the husband's unless proven otherwise. I have DNA evidence proving the child isn't mine. That helps, but she's also claiming the test was obtained illegally and that you've been abusive. Abusive how? Emotional abuse, controlling behavior. She's painting a picture of you as someone who's trying to abandon a pregnant wife out of spite. That's completely false. I believe you, but we need to be prepared. She's also requesting spousal support and asking the court to void your eviction notice. I closed my eyes and tried to think. Naomi was escalating, trying to use the legal system to force me back into the role of provider and father. What do we need to do? Document everything. Every interaction, every conversation, every text message, and we need character witnesses who can speak to your actual behavior during the marriage. That evening, I called Rick and explained the situation. She's playing hardball, Rick said, but she's also desperate, which means she's likely to make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind where she shows her true colors to people who matter. Judges, lawyers, witnesses. Desperate people do stupid things. Rick was right. Over the next few days, Naomi's behavior became increasingly erratic. She showed up at my workplace, causing a scene in the lobby until security escorted her out. She called my boss, trying to convince him that I was having a mental breakdown. She even contacted my mother, who lived 3 states away, spinning a sob story about how I'd become cruel and vindictive. Each incident was documented, photographed, and reported to my lawyer. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. I was having dinner at Murphy's, a local bar where Rick and I sometimes met after work, when Naomi walked in with Shannon and 2 other women I didn't recognize. They sat at a table across the room, but I could hear Naomi's voice getting louder as the evening progressed. She was telling anyone who would listen about her abusive husband who had abandoned his pregnant wife. He's sitting right over there, she said, pointing at me. Look at him. Doesn't even have the decency to be ashamed. The other patrons were starting to stare. Rick, who had joined me for dinner, leaned across the table. You want to leave? He asked quietly. No. Let her dig her own grave. Naomi's voice got louder. 3 years of marriage, and he throws me out the moment things get difficult. What kind of man does that? An older woman at a nearby table spoke up. What happened, honey? I'm pregnant, and he decided he doesn't want to be a father, so he's trying to claim the baby isn't his. That's terrible! I stood up and walked over to Naomi's table. The entire bar went quiet. Hi, Naomi. She looked up at me with defiant eyes. Quentin! I couldn't help but overhear your story. You left out a few details. I don't know what you mean. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos of the DNA test results. You forgot to mention that you cheated on me with Liam Foster and that the DNA test proves the baby isn't mine. I held up the phone so the nearby tables could see the official laboratory letterhead. You also forgot to mention that you've been living a double life for months, staying with your boyfriend while coming home to me for financial support. Naomi's face went white. You can't what? Tell the truth? Show people the evidence? Shannon stood up. This is a private matter. Not when she's telling lies about me to strangers in public. I addressed the woman who had expressed sympathy earlier. Ma'am, would you stay married to someone who cheated on you and tried to trick you into raising another person's child? The woman looked between me and Naomi, clearly uncomfortable. Well, no, I suppose not. That's all this is. I'm divorcing a cheating wife who got pregnant by her boyfriend and wanted me to pay the bills. Naomi stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. You bastard! I'm the bastard? You're the one who committed adultery and fraud. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, Shannon and the other women trailing behind her. As they left, I heard Shannon hiss. That was a disaster, Naomi. You can't keep doing this. I returned to my table where Rick was grinning. Well, that was educational, he said. Think anyone believed her story after that? Not a chance. You just turned her into the villain of her own narrative. The next morning, I got another call from my lawyer. Good news, David said. Your wife's attorney wants to settle. Settle what? She's the one who cheated. Exactly. I think they realize their case is weaker than they initially thought. They're offering to drop all claims in exchange for you covering her moving expenses. How much? $2,000. I thought about it. $2,000 to be completely free of Naomi, and her lies seemed like a bargain. Done. There's one more thing. She wants to keep some of the furniture from the apartment. Which furniture? The bedroom set and the dining room table. Both items were things we'd bought together during our marriage. Technically, I could probably claim them, but I didn't want anything that would remind me of our relationship. She can have them. Excellent. I'll draw up the papers. 3 days later, Naomi came to collect her belongings. She brought a moving truck and several friends, including Shannon. I stayed at work during the move, not wanting to deal with the drama. When I came home that evening, the apartment felt empty but clean. All traces of our shared life were gone, along with the furniture she'd claimed. It looked like the bachelor pad it had been before I'd met her. On the kitchen counter, she'd left a note. Quentin, I hope you're happy. You've destroyed our family over a mistake that we could have worked through. Someday you'll realize what you've lost. Naomi. I read it twice, then threw it away. She was wrong about one thing. I already knew what I'd lost. I'd lost my illusions about who she really was. And that was the best thing that could have happened to me. I was reviewing blueprints for a new hospital project when Rick knocked on my office door. You got a minute? Sure. What's up? Rick sat down and handed me a newspaper clipping. Thought you might want to see this? It was a birth announcement. Naomi had given birth to a daughter. The father was listed as Liam Foster. Saw it this morning, Rick said. Figured you'd want to know it was official. I studied the announcement. Naomi looked tired but happy in the photo, holding a baby that had Liam's distinctive nose and chin. There was no mention of marriage. Any word on how she's doing? My wife ran into her at the grocery store last week. She's working 2 part-time jobs, living in a small apartment across town. Liam's not in the picture. He bailed. Apparently. Turns out he wasn't ready for the responsibility of fatherhood. I felt a brief flicker of sympathy for Naomi, but it passed quickly. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. You ever regret it? Rick asked. Which part? Any of it. The divorce, walking away from the kid, starting over. I thought about it seriously. No, I regret that it happened, but I don't regret how I handled it. Good. You did the right thing. I did the only thing I could live with. Rick stood up to leave, then paused at the door. You know what the difference is between you and most guys in your situation? What? You had standards, and you stuck to them even when it was hard. After he left, I sat looking at the birth announcement for a few more minutes. Then I filed it away and returned to my blueprints. I was designing a children's hospital, a place where families would come to heal, where parents would fight for their children's lives, where love and sacrifice would happen every day. Someday, I thought, I'd be one of those parents, with a woman who respected me enough to be honest, with children who were actually mine, in a relationship built on truth instead of lies. I'd learned the hard way that not all foundations are solid, that some structures are built on sand and destined to collapse. But I'd also learned that when something falls down, you can clear the debris and start building again. This time I'd build it right.